Before the stock market, before venture capital, before the number 1 billion was anything more than a fantasy, a handful of men became the world's first billionaires. They didn't just build companies, they built untouchable empires, weaponizing their wealth in ways that would be impossible, and definitely illegal, today. They didn't play the game, they created it. They rigged the rules in their favor with moves so audacious they shattered economies, toppled rivals, and gave them a level of sovereignty usually reserved for kings. But what were these moves? How did men, often from humble beginnings, build fortunes so big they could bend governments to their will and control the flow of global commerce? These weren't just savvy investments. They were calculated, often brutal, strategic plays that redefined power itself. These men understood that true wealth wasn't just about having money, it was about controlling the systems that create money. Stay with us as we count down the 10 most audacious financial moves in history and reveal the secret playbook that turned mortal men into financial gods. We begin not with stocks or railroads, but with a fundamental truth: in times of chaos, capital is king. For the ambitious, war isn't a tragedy, it's a distraction for everyone else. While nations bleed and patriots march, the future titans of industry see only one thing: opportunity. The opportunity to hang on to their capital, sidestep the conflict, and strike when everyone else is broke and desperate. This brings us to our first move, a cold and calculated decision that laid the foundation for two of America's greatest empires. Section 10. The Conscription Dodge, prioritizing capital over country, 1860s. In 1863, with the American Civil War raging, President Abraham Lincoln signed the first Federal Conscription Act. The Union Army was desperate for men. But buried in the law was a clause that would become one of the most controversial in American history. A man could legally avoid the draft by paying a flat $300 commutation fee, or by hiring a substitute to fight in his place. For the average worker earning less than $2 a day, this was an impossible sum. It sparked the bitter cry that this was a rich man's war and a poor man's fight. While riots over the injustice erupted in New York City, a few ambitious young businessmen saw it as a simple financial transaction. Among them were a fledgling oil refiner in Cleveland named John D. Rockefeller and a ruthless shipping upstart named Cornelius Vanderbilt. Both were of draft age. Both saw the war not as a patriotic duty, but as a critical moment for their businesses. And both made the same cold calculation: they were far more valuable to their own futures than as a single soldier in a sprawling army. So, they paid up. Rockefeller, still in his early 20s, paid for a substitute, freeing him to focus on the booming oil business. Vanderbilt did the same. You could call it cowardice, but they saw it as a strategic allocation of their most valuable asset, their own time and capital. While their peers marched off to battle, they were free to navigate the economic turmoil, securing contracts and expanding their operations. That $300 wasn't an expense, it was an investment. An investment that bought them precious time and uninterrupted focus to build their empires while the nation tore itself apart. This move reveals a core tenet of the billionaire mindset. When a crisis offers a path of collective sacrifice and a path of personal opportunity, the road to extreme wealth is almost always the latter. They chose to invest in themselves, a decision that would pay dividends for decades. Section 9. The Gospel of Wealth, buying immortality, 1900s. By the turn of the 20th century, Andrew Carnegie was one of the most famous and infamous men on earth. He built a steel empire unlike any other, but his name was also stained by the brutal suppression of labor, like the bloody Homestead Strike of 1892. He was seen as the classic robber baron, a man who'd built his fortune on the backs of overworked employees. As he got older, he faced a problem bigger than any competitor: his own legacy. Would history remember him as a tyrant or a titan? His answer was a financial move so grand it would redefine philanthropy forever. In an 1889 essay that became his life's doctrine, The Gospel of Wealth, he laid out a radical idea. The wealthy, he argued, had a moral duty to give away their fortunes during their lifetimes. He famously declared, "The man who dies thus rich dies disgraced." This wasn't a call for simple charity, which he thought was often wasteful. Instead, Carnegie proposed a new model, strategic philanthropy designed to create ladders for the aspiring poor to climb. And then he put his money where his mouth was. After selling Carnegie Steel to J.P. Morgan in 1901, making him arguably the richest man in the world, he began Act Two of his life, giving it all away. But this was a carefully orchestrated campaign to transform his public image. He poured hundreds of millions, billions in today's money, into building institutions that would carry his name into eternity. He established over 2,500 public libraries, founded what is now Carnegie Mellon University, and created the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. This wasn't just generosity, it was a calculated purchase of immortality. Every time someone walked into a Carnegie library, his legacy was reinforced. Every discovery at a Carnegie-funded institution helped wash away the stains of Homestead. He donated over $350 million, about 90% of his fortune, by the time he died. Carnegie weaponized philanthropy for reputation laundering on a scale never seen before. He understood that a fortune in steel could rust, but a fortune invested in knowledge and culture would pay dividends for centuries. He converted his financial capital into cultural capital, ensuring the name Carnegie would be remembered not just for the steel he forged, but for the world he helped build. Section 8. The Reputation Laundering Machine, the Defensive Pivot, 1890s. While Andrew Carnegie sought to build a legacy, his great rival, John D. Rockefeller, was forced into philanthropy for a different reason: survival. By the 1890s, Rockefeller's Standard Oil controlled roughly 90% of the American oil market. It was the most feared monopoly in the world. Its ruthless tactics, however, had earned it powerful enemies. Muckraking journalists like Ida Tarbell exposed its corruption, and politicians, sensing a change in public opinion, began sharpening their knives. The company was portrayed as a giant octopus, crushing all competition. Rockefeller wasn't seen as a brilliant businessman anymore, but as a greedy puppeteer. The pressure finally boiled over with a landmark Supreme Court decision in 1911. Standard Oil was found in violation of antitrust laws and ordered to be broken up into 34 separate companies. For anyone else, this would have been a crushing defeat. For Rockefeller, it was just time for a strategic pivot. He began executing one of the most effective PR campaigns in history, with the goal of systematically giving away his fortune to transform his image from reviled robber baron to a benevolent saint of science. This wasn't Carnegie's aspirational philanthropy, it was a defensive maneuver. He didn't just write checks, he established powerful, forward-thinking institutions. He founded the University of Chicago, turning it into a world-class university almost overnight. He created the Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, which went on to pioneer countless medical breakthroughs. He established the General Education Board to modernize education, especially in the American South. The scale was breathtaking, and the effect was transformative. The headlines began to change. The name Rockefeller, once synonymous with corporate greed, slowly became associated with eradicating diseases, Nobel Prize-winning research, and education. It was a masterclass in narrative control. By funding universally praised causes, he made it hard for his critics to attack him without seeming to attack progress itself. He ultimately gave away over $500 million in his lifetime, a sum made even larger by the very breakup of Standard Oil, as the stock of the baby Standards skyrocketed in value. This move showed a profound understanding of power. When your business empire is under assault, build a second empire of public goodwill so powerful it makes you untouchable. Section 7. The Technology Gamble. Betting the farm on Bessemer Steel, 1870s. In the early 1870s, America ran on iron. Railroads, bridges, machinery, all of it was forged from the heavy, brittle metal. Steel existed, but it was a luxury, expensive and slow to produce. Then, on a trip to England in 1872, Andrew Carnegie, already a successful businessman, saw something that would change everything. It was the Bessemer converter, a furnace that blasted hot air through molten iron, burning off impurities in a spectacular shower of sparks. The result? Mass-produced, high-quality steel in minutes, not weeks. While others saw an interesting novelty, Carnegie saw the future. He saw a world built with steel, stronger, lighter, and more durable than iron. At a time when the economy was reeling from a financial panic that had ruined many of his peers, Carnegie made the most audacious bet of his career. He liquidated his other assets and poured everything into building the largest, most advanced steel mill in the world, the Edgar Thomson Steel Works. This was a quantum leap. He hired the foremost expert on the Bessemer process to design the plant for maximum efficiency. He implemented a ruthless system of cost accounting, tracking every expense down to the last screw, constantly pushing his managers to find savings. This obsession with technology and efficiency was his weapon. While his competitors used old, inefficient methods to make iron, Carnegie was churning out steel at a price they couldn't possibly match. When the demand for steel exploded, driven by railroad expansion and the first skyscrapers, Carnegie was ready. He had the capacity, the technology, and the cost structure to completely dominate the market. His bet paid off on an unimaginable scale. The price of steel rails plummeted over 70%, and Carnegie Steel became a behemoth. By the 1890s, it was producing more steel than all of Great Britain. This move wasn't just about adopting new tech. It was about having the foresight to see its revolutionary potential and the courage to bet everything on it during a crisis. Carnegie showed that the greatest fortunes aren't made by following trends, but by starting them. Section 6. The Civil War Arms Flip. Profiting from Chaos, 1861. In the chaotic early days of the Civil War, the Union Army was in a panic. It needed weapons, and it needed them yesterday. This created fertile ground for opportunists, and few were more opportunistic than a 24-year-old J.P. Morgan. While his future peers were building industries, Morgan's first big move was a masterclass in pure, unadulterated arbitrage. A deal so brazen it became a textbook example of wartime profiteering. It's known as the Hall Carbine Affair. The story starts with a government arsenal that held 5,000 Hall's carbines, rifles the Army had already declared obsolete and potentially dangerous. An arms dealer negotiated to buy these surplus rifles from the government for just $3.50 each. But he didn't have the cash. He found a middleman, who in turn approached the young J.P. Morgan. Here's where it gets audacious. Morgan agreed to finance the purchase. At the same time, the middleman had already cut a deal to sell those same rifles back to a Union general in the field for a staggering $22 apiece. Morgan wasn't just a lender, he was the financial architect of a scheme to buy weapons from one arm of the government and sell them to another arm of the same government at a more than 500% markup. The rifles were purchased, given a superficial cleaning, and shipped to the Army. When the government discovered the outrageous price for what it considered defective weapons, it refused to pay. But Morgan had structured the deal smartly. Eventually, the government, desperate for any weaponry, relented and paid up. The deal sparked a congressional investigation, but Morgan was largely shielded from public fallout. He had profited handsomely from the chaos of war, demonstrating a cold-blooded focus on the financial mechanics of a deal, ethics be damned. This move was a preview of the Morgan philosophy. In a crisis, identify the point of desperation, control the financing, and extract maximum value. It was a raw display of financial power that provided the seed capital for J.P. Morgan to become the most powerful banker in American history. Section 5. The Strategic Alliance and Shutdown. Weaponizing Collusion, 1870s. John D. Rockefeller understood a fundamental truth: whoever controls transportation controls the market. In the 1870s, that meant the railroads. But Rockefeller didn't own the railroads, men like Cornelius Vanderbilt did. So, instead of competing with them, he made them his partners in crime. First, the secret alliance. Rockefeller approached the powerful railroad magnates and made them an offer they couldn't refuse. In exchange for guaranteed, massive shipments of oil, he demanded secret, preferential shipping rates, or rebates. Publicly, all refiners paid the same price to ship a barrel of oil. But secretly, the railroads would pay a huge portion of that fee back to Rockefeller. This gave Standard Oil an immediate and enormous cost advantage no competitor could see or match. But the true genius was the second part, the drawback. This clause meant the railroads would not only give Rockefeller a rebate on his own oil but would also pay him a portion of the shipping fees collected from his competitors. Let that sink in. For every barrel of oil a rival refinery shipped, a cut went directly into John D. Rockefeller's pocket. He was making money from his own sales and his competitors' sales. With this unbeatable advantage, Rockefeller executed Phase 2. He targeted the Pennsylvania Railroad, a rival to Vanderbilt's lines. To cripple them, Rockefeller simply turned off the tap. He shut down his extensive refineries in Pittsburgh, which accounted for a huge portion of the railroad's business. At the same time, he ramped up production in Cleveland, shipping all of it on Vanderbilt's lines. The Pennsylvania Railroad was starved of cargo, and its stock plummeted. It was brought to its knees not by a competitor, but by a customer who had weaponized his logistics. It was the ultimate demonstration of leverage, transforming a business arrangement into a tool of economic warfare. Section 4. The Hostile Takeover, Financial Warfare on Wall Street, 1860s, before Cornelius, Commodore, Vanderbilt was a railroad baron. He was a steamship tycoon who'd earned his nickname through brutal competition. When he turned his attention to railroads in the 1860s, he brought that same aggressive spirit to Wall Street, where battles were fought with stock certificates. His epic struggle for control of the Erie Railway in 1868 became the stuff of legend. The Erie War was a clash of titans. On one side was the Commodore, the richest man in America, who wanted the Erie Line for his growing monopoly. On the other were three of Wall Street's most cunning speculators, Daniel Drew, Jay Gould, and Jim Fisk. They controlled the Erie and weren't about to give it up. Vanderbilt's move was straightforward and brutish: corner the market. He started buying every available share of Erie stock, confident his massive fortune could absorb the entire company. As he bought, the stock price soared. But Drew, Gould, and Fisk responded with audacious illegality. As treasurer of the Erie, Drew simply started printing thousands of new, unauthorized stock certificates in a back room. This was called watering down the stock. For every share Vanderbilt bought, they printed more, diluting his ownership and feeding his buying frenzy with fraudulent paper. He was trying to empty an ocean with a bucket while his opponents were hooked up to a fire hose. The trio printed over 50,000 new shares, dumping them on the market and collecting Vanderbilt's cash. When the scheme was discovered, Vanderbilt got friendly judges to issue arrest warrants. The trio fled to New Jersey and responded by bribing politicians in Albany to pass a law legalizing the new stock. In the end, Vanderbilt was forced to concede, outmaneuvered by his rivals' corruption. Though he lost the battle, his campaign was a landmark moment. It proved that a company's ownership was a battlefield, that stock markets could be weaponized, and that fortunes could be won and lost in the hostile struggle for corporate control. Section 3. The Vertical Integration Masterpiece, Controlling Every Step, 1860s-1880s. While his rivals were focused on outproducing or outselling each other, Andrew Carnegie was playing a much bigger game. His most profound move wasn't a single transaction but the relentless construction of an industrial fortress. He perfected the strategy of vertical integration, giving him such absolute control over his costs that it made competition nearly impossible. The concept was simple, but the execution was monumental: own everything. A typical steelmaker bought iron ore from one company, coal from another, and paid a railroad to ship it all. This left them vulnerable at every step. A price spike, a strike, or a hike in freight rates could cripple them. Carnegie decided to eliminate these variables. He didn't want to be a player in the system, he wanted to be the system. Starting in the 1870s, he began buying his suppliers. He purchased vast iron ore fields in Minnesota, securing a near-endless supply of raw material. He bought thousands of acres of coal fields. He acquired a fleet of steamships to transport ore across the Great Lakes and even built his own private railroad to haul materials directly to his Pittsburgh furnaces. From the moment iron was dug out of the ground to the moment a finished steel rail left his mill, it never left Carnegie's control. The result was a machine of terrifying efficiency. Because he owned every link in the supply chain, he was insulated from market swings and paid no profits to middlemen. His famous mantra was, "Watch the costs, and the profits will take care of themselves." This gave him devastating power. In good times, he reaped enormous profits. In bad times, when competitors were struggling, he could still turn a profit, using downturns to buy out desperate rivals for pennies on the dollar. Vertical integration was more than a business strategy, it was a weapon. It showed that the ultimate monopoly isn't just controlling a market, but controlling the very means of production itself. Section 2. The friendly, dinner and hostile buyout, the Cleveland Massacre, 1872. In the winter of 1872, a 32-year-old John D. Rockefeller executed a maneuver so swift and so ruthless it became known as the Cleveland Massacre. It was a 6-week campaign of economic warfare that laid the foundation for America's most dominant monopoly. At the time, Cleveland was the center of the oil refining industry, a chaotic market with too many refineries losing money. Rockefeller saw an opportunity not just to survive, but to conquer. His first step was to secretly form a cartel with the railroads, which gave him the illegal rebates and drawbacks that guaranteed he could operate at a lower cost than anyone else. This was his hidden weapon. With this power secured, he began his assault. He would invite his competitors to a meeting, sometimes a friendly dinner. There, he'd lay out his vision with chilling clarity, explaining the ruinous competition and the inevitability of consolidation. Then, he would open his books and show them his unbeatable shipping costs. The message was clear: I can sell kerosene for less than it costs you to make it. Then came the offer, delivered as a reasonable solution. Join me. Sell your refinery to Standard Oil. I'll give you a fair price in cash, or better yet, in Standard Oil stock. Together, we'll bring order to this chaos and all get rich. The choice was stark. Accept a generous buyout and become a partner, or refuse and be crushed. For those who hesitated, the pressure was immense. Rumors about his secret power spread panic. Banks, influenced by Standard Oil directors, suddenly refused to lend to his rivals. For those who still resisted, Rockefeller unleashed a brutal price war, flooding the market with cheap kerosene and driving them toward bankruptcy. Most chose to sell. In just 6 weeks, Rockefeller acquired 22 of his 26 main competitors in Cleveland. He had conquered an entire industry not with a better product, but with a superior and utterly ruthless strategy. This was the moment he went from being a major player to the undisputed king. Section 1. The geopolitical gold dump. Crashing an economy to build an empire, 1324. The single most audacious financial move in history predates stocks and corporations by centuries. It was a move so vast it involved no complex contracts, just the overwhelming power of pure wealth. It was executed in 1324 by Mansa Musa, the emperor of the Mali Empire in West Africa, a man whose fortune, estimated in today's terms at over $400 billion, makes modern billionaires look provincial. His stage was his Hajj, the pilgrimage to Mecca. But for Mansa Musa, this was a geopolitical roadshow designed to announce his empire's arrival on the world stage. He set out on a 4,000-mile journey with a procession of unimaginable splendor. His caravan had 60,000 men, including 12,000 slaves, and around 100 camels, each laden with up to 300 pounds of gold dust. The pivotal moment came during a 3-month stop in Cairo, a major global trade hub. Mansa Musa, in an act of what seemed like incredible generosity, began to spend. He handed out gold to the poor. He showered gifts on the city's elites. He bought common souvenirs with fistfuls of gold dust, dramatically overpaying for everything. But this fire hose of gold had a devastating, and likely intentional, effect. The sudden, massive influx completely overwhelmed the market. The basic law of supply and demand took over. When something becomes infinitely abundant, its value plummets. The value of gold in Cairo and across the Middle East crashed, triggering a decade-long recession. Why did this? It was the ultimate power play. This wasn't charity, it was economic warfare disguised as generosity. By single-handedly crashing the economy of the most powerful trade center in the region, Mansa Musa demonstrated a power greater than any army. He was advertising his empire's inexhaustible resources. Some accounts even say that on his return journey, he tried to fix the damage by borrowing back all the gold he could from Cairo's lenders at insane interest rates, a move that, if true, only further proved his total control over the market. Mansa Musa's gold dump showed that with enough wealth, you don't need to fight wars. You can simply rewrite economic reality. From the gold-flooded markets of 14th-century Cairo to the boardrooms of the Gilded Age, the playbook of the world's first billionaires reveals a few consistent, audacious truths. Their fortunes weren't built by playing it safe. They were built on action, on control, and on the belief that markets aren't to be followed, but to be made. We've seen how they weaponized technology to make their competition obsolete. How they used crisis as a cloak to get an unbeatable head start. They mastered collusion, forming secret alliances to crush outsiders. They built impenetrable fortresses by owning every single link in the chain of production. And when threatened, they weaponized philanthropy itself, buying a form of immortality that money alone couldn't provide. The common thread is a relentless drive for absolute control over resources, transportation, information, and ultimately, the competition. These weren't just financial moves, they were declarations of sovereignty. The tools have changed today, from railroads and refineries to algorithms and AI, but the underlying ambition remains exactly the same. So what do you think? Are these the most audacious financial moves in history? Who did we miss? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this look into the world of extreme wealth and power, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.